Jesus, let this go well. Be transition good. Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to Monday Moments with Patrina L. I tell you, it has been a long day, but I'm here. We are here at the Monday Moments with Patrina L. I thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already got here, come on in, come on in, come on in. If you watch the replay, thank you for watching the replay. We really appreciate you joining in. Listen, like, share, comment. Like, share, comment. You can always catch me also at youtube.com at EPL Ministries 1779. YouTube.com at EPL Ministries 1779. I told you I had a young lady that was coming on that is just as sweet as she can be. I met this young lady some years ago when my children were at Winers Academy. Her name is Rogjett Peterson. She is a clinical therapist in private practice within the Metro Detroit area. She has earned a master's degree degrees, more than one, okay, from the University of Michigan and Azusa Pacific University in California. Rogjett is passionate about tearing down the stigma of mental health, creating awareness, and supporting clients within the Black community. She's recently published a coloring book, y'all. Now, a coloring book for Black families, and is also building an online community focused on promoting holistic health, addressing systemic disparity, I'm sorry, disparities and empowerment within melanated populations. When I first met her, she's always been focused ever since I've met her. But when I first met her, she was just a sweetheart. She was on the teaching staff at Winers Academy, and she is just a sweetheart. And I was led to bring her in to be with us and to talk to us about depression, because I know that this is on her heart. This is really something that she takes to heart. So we want to welcome her today. Okay, so let's welcome her to Monday Moments with Patrina L. Welcome, Rogjett.
Hello, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time. I was just thinking, it's been such a long time. Like I think that was over 20 years ago now, or close to it, when I was on the teaching staff at Winans Academy. So I'm 46 now, and a lot has transpired over that
Wow.
amount. Uh, but I'm really happy to be here this evening. So thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm glad you accept the invitation to be with us on tonight, uh, to talk about depression. I do a lot of research about depression, and it's one of the topics that I wanted to bring forth on this show. And I thought what better way to bring in a professional? So, can you tell us about depression? I know there's many forms of depression. So, can you just tell us the beginning stages of depression, the different types, or what have you?
Yeah, so the first thing is just depression is a lot more complex than a lot of people realize.
Hmm.
We I'm thinking of my own self. Just when I first started learning about depression as someone who was not a professional, I always just thought it was somebody who was always just sad, or maybe they weren't engaging in activities like they used to. Thought maybe they had attitudes all the time. I just had, again, my own kind of stigmatized viewpoint of what depression was, but I really wasn't clear on all the different aspects to depression.
Yeah.
So it is very complicated and complex. So, for the purposes of this podcast tonight, I'm only going to focus on a few different presentations of depression.
Hmm.
Um, Major depression, or also the clinical version of depression, um, dysthymia, which is also referred to as persistent depressive disorder. And I'll touch on manic depression just a bit, but I think because we live in Michigan and in the Midwest, it's important for us to also highlight seasonal affective disorder. I think that's very important. So we can dive into kind of each of those. But basically, I think if you're okay with this, I just want to ask you what were your thoughts about what depression is? What did you think depression was?
Oh, wow. Uh, Depression to me is, well, I do realize that there's many types, but to me, it's where you get to the point where you're really not functioning
Mhm.
like you should. Um, your mind is constantly wandering off. I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know if it's possible that sometimes you could people may possibly mistake like ADHD or ADD for depression. And and then I do know that people mask depression. They carry on like everything is fine, but actually when they get off to themselves, get quiet, that's when the depression surface. So that's what I see depression as.
yeah, and I appreciate that, and I'm sure there are some listeners or viewers in your audience who can relate to what you just said. Depression is more than just feeling sad. Everybody has moments where they're feeling low, they're feeling upset or unmotivated from time to time, but depression is much more than simply being down in the dumps. Okay. Depressive disorder is a mood disorder that affects how a person thinks, feels, and behaves. Some signs and symptoms of depression can range from hopelessness, fatigue, a loss of interest in life, physical pain, suicidal thoughts. There's a host of different symptoms. It can be an increase in sleeping. It also can be insomnia, weight loss, weight gain, exhaustion and lethargy is something that is often noticeable. That irritability piece often presents when folks are really experiencing depression as well. Sometimes folks have an inability to focus or concentrate.
Hmm.
Um, there's sometimes lashing out, to loved ones or people in their close proximity.
Mm.
Um, Negative thinking, and really having a difficult ability or an inability to see positive solutions to situations.
Hmm.
Um, Feelings of worthlessness or guilt. And then a big one is a loss of interest or pleasure in activities that you used to do. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Negative thinking.
yeah, so I was hesitant about even saying that because I'm not someone who loves to use the term negative thinking. I like to kind of talk from an angle of are the thoughts that you're having helpful or are they unhelpful?
Hmm.
Negative or positive. That's just my
Hmm.
own personal style, right? Like I just appreciate that our thoughts can either be helpful thoughts or unhelpful thoughts. And then when we decide or when we determine if they're helpful or not, then we know kind of what to do with them. We
Mm-hmm.
can action toward those thoughts. Um, so with clinical depression, major depressive disorder, there's what's called a major depressive episode that happens. And that's a period of about 2 weeks or longer in which an individual experiences the symptoms of major depression, such as hopelessness, loss of pleasure, fatigue, and suicidal thoughts. In particular, the person must experience a low mood or loss of interest in activities. And so again, that's a period of about 2 weeks or longer. That's what we consider a major depressive episode. Um, and so, when you have someone or if you are dealing with sadness or low mood, if it hasn't necessarily been a period of 2 weeks or longer, it's not clinically going to be diagnosed as major depressive disorder. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
does that make sense? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot that goes into meeting particular criteria for depression. We have our I guess you can call it kind of the mental health Bible called the DSM-5, um, and that's pretty much what outlines the criteria for different diagnoses.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to have like more than 5 symptoms: the depressed mood, the loss of interest or pleasure, weight loss, gain, insomnia, hypersomnia, sometimes what we call psychomotor agitation or retardation, just meaning that your movements are slowed or they're restless, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
fatigue, decreased concentration, all of these symptoms that I'm naming, you need to have 5 or more of those symptoms within a 2-week period. Um, for to meet the basic criteria for major depressive disorder. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Wow.
There's a
Wow.
lot complicated, and there's additional criteria as well. And I just don't want to go too deep into it,
Yeah.
uh, but it's really important for us to be able to recognize within ourselves and within those around us, our family members, our friends, our community members, those who we interact with. It's important for us to recognize symptoms, right? Because that's the only way that we're going to be able to get some help.
Yeah. I I know that this is a passion of yours, to help, especially, as I stated in the introduction of you, in our melanated population. And it seems as though, not just with the mental health, it just seems as if, in our just health system period, for the melanated population, we're being overlooked.
Mm,
We're not getting the top of the line as the other side.
mhm.
Why do you think, especially in the mental health part? Because we I mean, let's face it, we actually have a right to really be dealing with a lot of mental issues when you think about where we come from.
Yeah, I think that disparity presents for a few reasons. One of the reasons is just there is a gap in terms of medical care when you compare melanated folks, people of color, to non-people of color, right?
Hmm.
Um, there, the other aspect is that we're often underdiagnosed, and that ties to kind of the stigma within our own community. And so if you think about it, growing up, I know we're of a different generation, right? But growing up, when did you hear anybody talking about depression? When did you
Right.
hear anybody talking about, okay, I'm going to go talk to somebody about, maybe some problems or issues that I'm having? What's interesting is with the work that I do, I have a variety of different clients, and I'm reminded of a time when I had a non-black client. The bulk of my clients are black, but I
Hmm.
had a non-black client, and going through some of our intake, I was just really surprised because they had mentioned that they had been in therapy for some odd number of years.
Mm-hmm.
many, many years. Okay. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, like that long ago, like I don't know anybody who's been in therapy who is black, right? Who had been in therapy for that amount of time. And and it's no diss or any shade on, the person that I'm talking about. It's just when you think about accessibility, like what the access looks like, right? For people of color and, black folks, sometimes we don't have the access, right? Because of the systems that are in place um to actually provide the services that we need.
Yeah.
Um the stigma within our own communities is actually pretty big. It's when you think about what a lot of us have gone through historically within the Black community. There's a lot of talk about you just got to push. Suck it up, just keep going. If something bad happens, you just got to keep pushing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because systemically, the way our environment is set up, as a whole, we have to we have to kind of strive to be the best to get so far, if that makes sense, right? And so we're not necessarily taking the time to, well, we are now, like I feel like we're getting better at it as a community, but not necessarily taking time to engage in self care practices, right? Some of us haven't learned how to cope in healthy ways. I remember having a best friend of mine who was killed when I was in high school, and he lived across the street from me. And this was somebody I was very close to. He was like a brother. I was 15 when he was killed, and I just remember my mom waking me up, in the middle of the morning, about 2 or 3 in the morning, and telling me that he had gotten killed, right? And the next morning, or that day, I'm crying, but I have nowhere to put these emotions.
Yeah.
My mom grew up, in the segregated South. Civil rights movement was very active in it, and so for her, it was like, okay, you got about 5 seconds to cry, and then you got to keep living. You got to keep
Keep it
going, right?
moving.
Yeah, and so for me, it was really difficult. That was my first real I guess, experience with, some like gun violence, right? He was killed. It
Mm-hmm.
was his real experience, and it was a party. He was killed at a party that I was asked to go to with him. Like he asked me to go to the party with him, and I couldn't go because my parents told me that, that they didn't want me there. And so there was a lot of guilt that I felt, right?
Uh-huh.
There was a lot of just not understanding why it happened. But I didn't have anywhere to place these emotions. And so it was just business as usual. We go to school the next day, right?
Right.
We process this with my parents. And again, it's no fault to my parents. They didn't really know how to engage in this way, to really kind of be there to support me emotionally, with
Right.
the right? Because they're working and they're doing what they have to do,
Right.
having responsibilities. I was raised as an only child, and so it was literally just me left with my emotions. And I really struggled for a long time. Like I ended up, developing, symptoms of depression thereafter. Of course, I didn't realize that they were symptoms of depression until long after, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but it really did. I would say I was definitely a child. Once I got to about age 16, 17, right in there, like I remember the low mood. I remember the depression. I remember the thoughts of suicide. But again, I didn't have anywhere to place it. So for me, I was someone who was always artistic and creative. And so, I just used to write out all of my emotions. And this is how, poetry became a thing with me
Oh,
because I
wow.
think I can write some things out, at least I can get it out, right? Or I can write a song and at least get it out. And thankfully, God gave me enough insight to be able to do that, right? Like no one taught me to do that. It was just do this, right? And so
Yeah.
um, so again, I just feel that some of that disparity is just the fact that historically we haven't really known how to engage in conversations about depression in a way that's healthy.
Yeah.
We sometimes just hold it in, right? It's just one more thing that we stuff down, or maybe we feel like we can't talk about our issues to someone else because we feel like we'll be a burden to them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, the other aspect is that, again, and I'm speaking generally, of course, but historically in the Black community, your business stays in the home. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you don't talk about this business outside of the house, right?
Yeah.
And so, sharing with someone else, outside of the confines of your household was looked down upon,
Right.
right?
Right.
People enough to do that, especially
Right.
children, right? And then, of course, you think about community, and how people are perceived within the community.
Mm-hmm.
If you're out here sharing, what you might be experiencing, in terms of low moods and whatnot, maybe you'll be perceived differently within the community.
Right.
Perceptions that often was equated to someone with depression in the Black community is it being seen as a weakness? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you have these low moods, you're weak if you can't, if it's impacting you at a functional level daily. So yeah, I think that those are some reasons. There's a host of reasons systemically, but we don't
Yeah.
have to into all of those. But yeah, those are some of the aspects of why.
You mentioned that you kind of started or you went first experienced depression through grief.
Yeah, yeah.
And so talk a little bit about how grief because I know I can now I can say for my family, and I know so many, especially since 2020
Mhm,
pandemic hit, and the pandemic hit a lot
mhm,
of well, a lot of people, but it's to me it seems as though it really hit the melanated population hard,
mhm.
and to lose loved ones to the point where we couldn't even hold their hand as they transitioned. And you know, um, my family, we've lost well, we lost during the pandemic, but the immediate, we've lost three and within the last 2 years, and
Oh,
so my family is in grieving. And how do you grieve but don't go into depression?
yeah.
Because it seems as though it's so easy to slip into that depression, and before you know it,
Mhm,
you're
mhm.
there, and it's hard to get up out of that rabbit hole of depression. So
Mhm.
how do you do that?
Yeah, so again, kind of a loaded question, but first I just want to offer my condolences to you and your
Thank
family
you.
for the transition. To um, you know,
Yeah.
when you're talking about grief and depression, it's kind of like thinking about it. There's a term or phrase that's situational depression or adjustment disorder. This is another um, diagnosis, and basically, it's like short-term stress-related types of depression, right? So it can develop after a person experiences a traumatic event or a series of changes to their everyday life. Um, and I would venture to say that grief kind of hits some of that, right? Um, it's basically understanding that it is okay to grieve, to go through the process, but when it starts impacting your daily functioning, right?
Mhm.
That it's important to seek some help.
Mhm.
So with any diagnoses or any and I'm only saying diagnoses because I don't know who my audience is, and I want just to make sure that they understand some of the clinical terms, right? But with any diagnoses or any symptomology, the question you really need to ask yourself is it impacting my daily life? Is it negatively impacting my daily life? And to what degree, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Has it been impacted? Um,
Okay.
um, And the thing about grief is that, you can go 10, 15 years and still have sad thoughts about your loved one that was lost,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But does it impact you in a way where you can't function, where you can't function the way you need to function to be, a contributing member of society and, get everything that you need to accomplish done in your household and um, you're raising a family, is it interrupting that process of those responsibilities? In terms of coping strategies to be used. Meditation and prayer, depending on what, your background is, that can be a helpful thing for most people, like I know that there may be people watching who might not be believers, right? Um, but even in that, just being able to meditate or um, engage in gratitude, right? So one of the things that I found helpful, two things that I found really helpful, dealing with some grief that I dealt with back about 12 years or so ago, um, was writing out every night like 2 to 3 things that I was grateful for.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
Um, and then another thing was being able to process the depths, right? So I will share this. I was going to share this next week, but since we're here and we opened up the grief discussion, I'm going to go ahead and share
Okay.
it. Um, so in 2009, going into 2010, I lost the equivalent of 6 family members and a friend, and it rocked me. I was a full time grad student. I was living in California at the time, so away from family,
So
and
sorry.
thank you. Yeah, and it was within a 10-month span where I lost all of these folks. And it was something that after the third death, I actually kind of became numb,
Hmm.
right? Because I was focused on trying to just graduate from school, right? And I was in a really rigorous program that was accelerated, right? And so I didn't have a lot of downtime or extra time. And
Ah,
so what I found is that, after the first couple of deaths, and the first one rocked me, like that was the pivotal shift. It was my nephew who was like a brother to me. And it really kind of set everything kind of different in my life, right?
hmm.
After
Hmm.
um, but after he passed, and then my godfather, and then the other family members and the friend, my neighbor downstairs at the time, um, I got to a point where I was just kind of going through the motions of life, though it wasn't feeling anything anymore.
Hmm.
Right, about the third one, I was just trying to get through school, and that's what I kept telling myself. And about Well, it was after I graduated. I was at church, and I was going to a pretty diverse church in California. And I remember I was leading a group of small group leaders, right?
Hmm.
And I had just finished conducting a meeting with about 40 members. And I went into the hallway, and this older gentleman, I think he was probably about 68 or 70, Mexican guy, came up to me. He said, "You can only hold a beach ball underwater for so long before it comes to surface."
Hmm.
And that alone, because he didn't know anything about what I had gone through, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But saying that and giving me that visual was the catalyst for me to do some introspective work of, I really need to get some help.
Hmm.
Prior to me getting my own help and having a therapist, I kind of, was kind of with other folks who are kind of aligned to the stigma, right? Like, I don't need a therapist. I'm not going to just sit and talk about all my feelings. What are they going to do to help me? They've got their own issues. I'm a Christian. I should be able to pray it away, like all of that, right? Um, and I got to a point where I was like, yeah, no, I need some real help because I felt like I wasn't going to be able to make it. I was going to
Hmm.
grad, and the day after I graduated, my mom flew home, flew back to Michigan, and I was left with all of everything that had happened. I had my degree, I had my new job, and I broke down in tears, and I was crying for hours because
Mhm.
it was I finally had felt the weight of everything hit me sort of all at once,
Mm.
and I didn't know what to do. So I prayed, of course, and then after that, it was all right. Let me, connect with a therapist, and thankfully, at my church, they were partnered with some mental health professionals, and so I ended up. That was sort of my first sort of introduction into having a therapist.
Okay. Okay.
So it took me a long time to get there, and it took me a lot. Like I went through a lot to
Mhm.
end up there. But like the work that I do now, when I'm trying to tear this stigma down and create awareness, we don't have to wait until the wheels are falling off the thing to get some help.
Right. Right. And you mentioned when you first mentioned prayer, and and you mentioned about being at church and everything, and I was gonna wait till next week to bring this part out, but since you went there, because I've encountered many that says, well, um, saints not supposed to be depressed. They not supposed to, because we're saints, and we believe in God, and we just pray about it and stuff. But and because you have a therapist or decide to talk with someone, doesn't um, depreciate your faith, or what have you. Um, what do you think about? What do you say to that comment, that stigma about you know I you're a Christian, why are you depressed?
You know, that is loaded. There's so much to say here. Where I want to start. You're a Christian. Why are you depressed?
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of reasons why a person can be depressed. I mean, if we just look at the context of the way Black folks live within the U.S., there's racial traumas with all the time, microaggressions. That could be reasons why we're depressed. It could be traumatic histories that we've experienced, right? That could lead to the depression. Um, Obviously, we just touched on grief a little bit. I'm sure we'll dive more into it next week as well. But those are reasons for depression. I would, for the person who's asking me that, I probably would just answer a question with a question, and ask them, like how they have gone through life and not had moments of having a depressive episode. Like I just don't believe anybody who tells me that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't believe people who tell me they've never had a depressive episode.
I think, um I don't know, I think at this point in my life, and we've known each other for a good while, uh I probably would say, my response would probably be, may not would sound right, but I don't know. You may be the reason why I'm depressed. I don't know. That might be my response. But dealing with church folk, and you know and stuff, because of things that goes on in the church. But nevertheless, we'll move on.
Well, I mean,
Because some people go through in the church, and it
absolutely,
causes depression.
absolutely, and that's some of my work as well. Like I didn't know how deep we were going to get into this, but that like if you look at my Psychology Today profile, like I actually have a blurb in there that talks about those who have dealt with spiritual abuse
Mm-hmm.
in these environments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I definitely, I've been member of a church and several churches at this point, where I've seen the abusive nature of, whoever, the power dynamics and people being impacted by that, and kind of what the long term effects of that have been, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it might be that they are the source of the depression, or can trigger it in the congregants and whoever else is there. Um, there was something else I was going to say about this. What else?
Huh?
Oh, I said, what else do you have? Like, I
Oh,
actually,
I thought you was trying to remember what you was going to say. I wanted to ask you, and this is really just a simple thing because now they have this the word coach. What is there actually a difference between the 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 therapist and coach, or clinical therapist and coach, or
yeah, I mean, I think, when you're a therapist, obviously you've gone to school, um, for however you got there. So whether this is a licensed professional counselor, this is a social worker, this is a clinical psychologist, right?
mm-hmm,
Um, through significant schooling. Um, to obtain those degrees, and hopefully have had some practice and internships and have actually worked with the population of folks that you want to see. You've been under some type of supervision from clinical therapists also, like while you're learning and practicing.
mm-hmm,
um, that is the educational aspect of it. And then those who are coaches, I don't diminish the work that they do by any means. But it's just a different hat. Like, coaches can speak to mental health as well, right? But coaches aren't going to have issues with insurance coming in, right? The billing aspect of that. They may or may not have had exposure or experience dealing with certain populations, right? So again, when you go through a program to become a therapist, you've done some internships in particular environments. So, like for me, my internships were with Black Family Development in Detroit. My internship, I had three, like kind of rotational. I also worked with the Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network, and I worked at Beaumont in Westland.
mm-hmm.
And this was me interfacing with folks, pretty much on a daily basis. And all of that being supervised by a licensed professional.
Okay, okay.
Um, Whereas coaching, you don't necessarily get that aspect.
um One thing I find and have encountered, uh depressed single moms, because they doing it all. Hats off to them, but they're doing it all. The work, school, um, the extracurricular activities. And when I say school, I'm not just talking about the kids, talking about them too. Because they trying to pick up where they left off. You know, keep it going, make a better life for themselves, for their children. But they get depressed, they get down, and they have to deal with a lot because people are so judgmental, and you know you know some people don't want to look at, they've been there, they just want to look at where they are. They don't think about how they got to where they are. They just want to look at where they are, and then they want to look back. And the old quartet song years ago. Um, what was it? If Don't look back on the man unless you picking them up.
And so I don't know that one.
Oh,
Probably,
okay. I'm sorry.
yeah.
Right. You are much younger than me.
So,
we are in two different generations. Okay, I'm sorry. But let address that a little bit.
yeah,
And
I'm not a single parent, so I don't want to, speak from experience that I don't have, but I do have
okay.
But I do have friends who are single parents, right? And I've been in their lives, like really dear friends of mine
Hmm.
who have battled depression and who have gone through some things, right? And so, um, you know, with anybody, regardless of if they're a single parent or not, with anyone, it's about learning coping strategies, right? Like that's something that I feel like we don't necessarily learn when we're young, or at least we haven't historically, right? Um, I think now what we're seeing in the schools, you know, are the social emotional learning that's taking
Hmm.
place, and so they're learning how to cope. Like there's literal classes or some break period within the class within the school day where they're learning how to engage in self care or different strategies, right? So for the single mom, excuse me, let me say single parent. For the single parent, the biggest thing I think is being able to have moments to do, even if it's just like one self care activity a week, right? Whatever that looks like, because it might be difficult to get that time, but we've got to be able to have some priority of ourselves, even though everybody's pulling on you, pulling on you, pulling on you. You can only give from a full cup, right? And so there has to be a moment where that single parent has to carve out, even if it's just 5 minutes, where they can do some deep breathing or 5 minutes of let me say some positive affirmations to myself, right? Let
Hmm.
me talk to a friend. Let me get active, right? Because exercise helps with mood.
Okay.
Maybe maybe it's about changing their diet, right?
Mm.
Because what we eat also impacts, the chemicals in our brain and how all of that aligns to our mood as well. Like all
Wow.
of that, like foods can affect our mood. Sugary
Wow.
foods, yeah, sugary foods and drinks, for example, can worsen depression symptoms. Right?
Wait,
Caffeine,
wait. Sugary
sugary
foods. What?
foods can worsen depression symptoms because of the
Oh,
impact.
wow.
So there's something. And again, I don't want to get into all the brain anatomy. There are neurotransmitters that we all have, okay? And these neurotransmitters, maybe you've heard of them. You've got dopamine, you've got serotonin, norepinephrine, there are others. But serotonin levels and dopamine levels and the norepinephrine, all of those together help sort of, they need to be in balance for our moods to do what they need to do, right? They
Okay.
right? And so when you hear people say like, oh, they have a chemical imbalance or, something's kind of off with the chemicals, they're referring to the neurotransmitters.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
there are certain foods that impact serotonin levels, right? Or dopamine levels. So if you have excessive sugar or, like you're drinking a lot of sodas or pops and whatnot, um, it actually can create challenges, right, or create issues because it's throwing those levels off. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
So it might be someone who needs to change how they're eating, right? Maybe
Okay.
replacing some of those sugary foods and drinks with maybe fresh fruit or yogurt or some nuts and some seeds, right? Um, caffeine typically is going to be on the anxiety side of things, but maybe it's uh, replacing that with some teas, right, or decaf. Um, Getting some omega 3s, like some fatty acids, because that's going to help the brain, right? So maybe it's eating more fish. There's a lot that's involved. That's why I said depression is really complex because
Mm.
what's going on in the brain and how it impacts the rest of the body and your mental process. Um, so I don't know if that answered the question fully enough in terms of the single parent, um, but it's important to take time to just be grounded and to be centered, right? Um, there's something that's called 5 4 3 2 1, and this is a technique that can get you to kind of stabilize when you're having these like roller coaster moments. So maybe
Mhm.
you're feeling depressed, maybe you're dealing with some, manic or high energy, and then it uh, retreats to some depression, right? And so this is kind of the bipolar disorder aspects or symptomology. Um, when you're feeling that way, you can do something called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is in your environment that you're in right now. Name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, 1 thing that you can taste. Because
Wow.
that's going to get you all your senses involved, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
brings you to right now. So instead of um, being so focused on maybe what is causing the depression, if you can identify a cause, right? Sometimes we ruminate or we think about, all the unhelpful thoughts or the or quote unquote negative things, right, that are
Mm-hmm.
coming up, that just are focused in that, instead of focusing on those past situations or dynamics. We want to be in the present, right? And so, in order to do that, sometimes we have to engage our senses to just get us to be grounded in the right now, right? If you feel overwhelmed with tears and overwhelmed with grief, it's okay. What are 5 things that I can see? What are 4 things that I can touch right now in the moment? 3 things that I can hear, 2 things I can smell, 1 thing I can taste. Looking at your, I think I watched one of your videos. I don't know if it was a few weeks ago or recently, but you were talking about laughter being medicine, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also important, for the single parent or anybody who's dealing with depression. Don't spend your downtime watching things that are going to continue to perpetuate a low mood, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that I do after a long day of work, and of course I'm dealing with, like clients all day, my veg out, or how I tend to kind of just relax or retreat, is by watching sitcoms, right? Either that or Marvel. And for 2 reasons. Sitcoms are gonna make me laugh. Marvel is gonna take me out of everyday life. Like I'm in a fantasy world, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't have to really think about anything. It's just kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this is cool, right? But having a laugh, maybe it's about, watching a comedy show or spending time with a
Yeah.
funny friend, or if you have paid attention to my Facebook page, before the coloring book, I'm big on like sharing silly memes, and I do that. A lot of people are just like, it's so silly you share all this stuff, right? But the reason that I do it was because I had gone through a period where I realized I was taking in so much from like the day, right? Like everything that's going on in the world. And, I was in school at one point and learning about the oppressive systems. And there was so much negativity, right? That
Mm-hmm.
I was exposed to every day, that I was like, I got to lighten this up, right? And
Right.
so, like, let me start making myself laugh. Let me find some memes. Let me encourage some other people, get them laughing, because they may be feeling the same way that I'm feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mentioned the gratitude journal. That is so helpful.
Yeah.
When you can sit down and reflect at the end of the day, what are 3 things I'm grateful for today,
Yeah.
right? Every day. If you can do that, that's going to help kind of, lift your mood a bit. Because, and it doesn't need to be anything like, um, anything major or huge, right? It could just be, I got up today and I took a shower.
Mm-hmm.
But for those who are severely dealing with depression, sometimes getting up to take a shower or to do basic, let me brush my teeth today, these things can be an arduous, very difficult task when
Mm.
somebody dealing with depression. And so the gratitude, I was able to get up. I was able to go for a walk today. Another thing, that is helpful, and these are all coping strategies that I'm, naming. And again, it's not just for the single parent, but, you know, taking taking the view off of your own self and encouraging others is helpful,
Wow.
right? So, like, in a moment when you're going through something really deep and you're feeling the depressive symptoms, focusing your attention on someone else to help them can help you. When you're
Wow.
turning attention to someone else, okay, it can help you regulate your emotions, right? And this could just be, this could be kind words, any type of acts of service. This could be, maybe you pay for, I don't know, somebody's Starbucks in the car behind you, whatever it is, right? Like you kind of stepping outside of um, sort of the all-consuming thing that you're dealing with can help you.
Okay. Wow.
Prayer, prayer, meditation, I mentioned that, right? Like those
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
um, yeah, there's just I think there's a whole lot. I feel like we could do like weeks of this. Um, there's a lot to really touch on, when it comes down to when it comes down to the person who is experiencing. Let's talk about the functionally depressed, right? So every day, I think you mentioned it as masking, right?
Mhm.
You show up every day doing their routine thing. They're able to do that routine thing, so they're getting up, going to work, engaging with people, but they're going home and they're crying every night, or they're going home and they're drinking, or they're, engaging in risky behaviors um, to try to escape or to alleviate some of the stress that they're feeling.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's important to be able to recognize the symptoms in yourself, right? But then take that step, like, okay, I need to get help. What I recognized about my own self, and I'm really transparent. It's interesting because as a therapist, you're kind of taught like don't overshare, don't share too much of your own, and I have pretty healthy boundaries. But as a black woman who is a clinician, when there's only about 4% of black folks in the world, as far as I know, who are clinicians, right?
Mhm.
4% of the population are black. Um, I tend to be a little more transparent with my right. So I let my clients know that yeah, I have had a history of depression and anxiety. I let them know right out the gate because I need them to understand that you can be functional, you can be high achieving, you can do all these things and still have these symptoms. You can be a
Uh-huh.
Christian, right?
Okay. Okay.
You also can be someone who gets the help that they need and still thrive as someone who has had those symptoms before.
Mhm.
Right? Okay, so somebody just put in the chat how much longer because I have questions.
They put what?
How much longer do we have because I have questions?
Oh,
I
okay.
believe you're done.
I did not see that.
I just saw it pop up. Did
Oh,
you know if
so we'll take their question and then we're gonna go into the next week. Get ready. Yeah, and we're gonna wrap up because you had hit on a few things I was going to go into next week about. So I'm sorry I don't see their question, but if you see it,
yeah,
you
well, it's so I don't. Her. This is Patricia. Um, and so she said, "How much longer do we have? Because I have questions. I know I'm late. It's me. I love you, Miss Peterson. Love you too, Patricia."
of course it would be Patricia.
Right, right. What's your question, Patricia? And so I'll just wait for that to come up. But as she's typing, oh, she said, "How do you know if a therapist?" Oh, this is an excellent question. How do you know if a therapist is a good fit? Someone that will not pacify you. So here's the thing. I tell people all the time that, finding a therapist is all about fit. Okay. It may, Patricia, it may take you trying several or, going and seeing like, okay, is this vibing? Is this working? Right? Like you might not like your first therapist or second therapist, right? You might just need to try them on, and that's okay, and that's part of the process. Um, and really, it's kind of a hard question to ask because you're the only person who knows what you need, right? So, like,
Right.
if you know what you need and this particular therapist is not giving you that or offering you that, then it's time to pivot, right? It's like I'm the type of person, and I'll share. Like I have a therapist. I have my own therapist. And so for me, I remember having a therapist. That first therapist that I had in California, after about a month and a half of work together, meeting weekly, it might have been maybe 2 months. I realized we weren't. It wasn't going anywhere. Right? Okay, we just not nothing. I don't know if this is what we're doing here, right? And you have to also keep in mind that your therapist is not a fixer, right? Because sometimes folks who don't really have experience with therapy will go into a therapeutic environment and think that the therapist is there to fix their problems, and that's not how therapy works. Therapy is a collaborative process or should be. So if you run into a therapist who's trying to fix you, who's giving you a bunch of advice, giving you all these solutions, that's not how therapy is supposed to work. Therapy should be inclusive of you. It should be a collaborative process, right? Where almost like as the client, you kind of guide it, if that makes sense. And so um, only you will know if it's a good fit or not. And I think it's important to ask your therapist questions, So, like, if you're somebody who appreciates a therapist who can kind of push back a little bit, right? On maybe what you're sharing, then let them know. I need somebody to hold me accountable and kind of push back a little bit here, right? Or if you kind of need a more sensitive, nurturing therapist, right? Maybe you go to a therapist and they don't have that quality, but you're sensitive. You need that. It's either letting them know, like, okay, I kind of feel like there's a little bit of this abrasive kind of personality coming off. Can you be a little more nurturing, right? I think it's important for you to communicate with your therapist. But it's all about trying to find the right fit. Okay. If you realize that you're in the therapeutic relationship and the therapist is pacifying you or you don't feel like it's going anywhere, let them know because I think feedback is good, right? Don't just ghost them, but let them know and move on because you have the right to do that. You have the right to get the care that you need. You feel
Okay.
like, Patricia?
So I found out why I didn't see my comments. uh so right quick, I know I we are a few minutes past 8 o'clock, and we do have a part two already scheduled to come back next week, and we'll have some more questions for you for next week. But while Patricia brought up the question about the therapist, and I just want to piggyback off of this question that she asked while we're here before we cut off. Is it good to, or do you advise that you use a therapist of someone that knows you personally?
Okay, so and it's sticky for a lot of reasons. It depends on it depends on the type of therapist and their code of ethics that they are accountable to. Okay, so like as a social worker, I have a set of code of ethics that I'm accountable to. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
licensed professional therapist or professional counselor, they have their own. So it depends on what's outlined within the code of ethics. Now, um, I do not typically see clients who I have had a good relationship with,
Mm-hmm.
because it can just get it can get sticky, right? And my code of ethics um, doesn't say that we can't, but it's recommended that we don't really get involved in that. Now, um, there are a few reasons because depending on whatever the relationship is, there would be an imbalance possibly of power dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Therapeutic relationship just by definition has a power dynamic there, right? Um, with the clinician being perceived as knowing more, like that whole thing, right? And so when the client comes in, they may see them as uh, someone in a position of power, right? And so there could be abuses that take place, hopefully not, right? Obviously, but that relationship could be abused, or it might not be the most effective when it's somebody that close to you. Does that
Okay.
make
Okay. Yes. Yes, it does. All right, lady. I have enjoyed this broadcast. Um, and I have I have a sheet of takeaways. I do, because I was going to ask you about coping strategies, and
sense?
you brought that out. And one you didn't mention the word journal, but you mentioned it because you said what you did was you started writing songs, which is basically journaling, and that's what I did coming along.
Right.
Uh, so I really enjoyed today. Next week we're going to pick up with part two. Um, and I want to say to the audience, should you have any questions, be prepared to ask your questions. We will address your questions on next week. Miss Peterson, I enjoyed you. Thank you so much. You've been very informative. And Carlton and Tamika Reynolds. So, does every emotional issue, does it have need for a therapist? Can we table your question and answer it next week? Because we're getting ready to sign off, and we're going to answer your question first next week. We thank you so much for tuning in to Monday Moments with Patrina L. Remember to like, share, and comment. You can watch the replay either via Facebook, or you can go to my YouTube channel at epfirstyoutube.com at EPL Ministry 1779, and watch the replay there. You go to the live tab or the podcast tab, and you will see it there on my YouTube channel. Okay? And while you're there, guess what? Subscribe. Make sure you push all, that way you get the little ding bell to let you know when something has new has been posted. I'll see you next week. Patricia says she miss you, and I miss you too, Patricia. All right. Love you.
Take
See
care.
you
Thank you.
guys next week.